Before we start, please take a moment to comment and subscribe on this channel. Tell us where you are watching from and what is happening around you. Now relax and enjoy the story. The storm had been trying to break into the shop all night. It rattled the sash windows and threw handfuls of rain against the glass like gravel, demanding entry. But the crow's nest had stood on the corner of Rainsborough Lane for 200 years, and it knew how to keep the weather out. It was the silence inside that was the problem. Usually, a bookshop at night has a comfortable silence. It sounds like settling paper and breathing wood. It sounds like time resting. Tonight, the silence sounded like waiting. My name is Elara Vance, and I deal in things that people have forgotten. I am an archivist of rare manuscripts, a restorer of bindings, and for the last 5 years, the keeper of this shop while its owner, old Mr. Abernathy, faded slowly into the fog of dementia in the care home on the hill. I had come back downstairs because I had forgotten to lock the safe in the back office. A small mistake. A careless mistake. The kind of mistake that changes the plot of your life forever. I walked down the spiral iron staircase from my flat above the shop, my slippers silent on the metal. The shop floor was a maze of tall mahogany shelves, creating canyons of shadow where the streetlights couldn't reach. The air smelled of vanilla and almond, the chemical breakdown of old lignin in paper and the faint, metallic scent of ozone from the storm. And something else. Copper. Wet, heavy copper. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The reading lamp on the main desk was still on. I had turned it off. I was certain I had turned it off. A pool of yellow light spilled across the green leather blotter, illuminating a stack of invoices and a crystal inkwell. But the light didn't stop at the desk. It stretched to the floor, highlighting a pair of shoes. Expensive shoes. Italian leather, polished to a shine that repelled the dust of my shop. They were pointing toes up. I didn't scream. I didn't run. My mind simply catalogued the image like a new acquisition, noting the details before the emotion could hit. The shoes belonged to Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was a man who looked at buildings and saw only the empty space they would occupy once he bulldozed them. He had been trying to buy the crow's nest for 6 months. He had threatened. He had cajoled. He had offered money that made my stomach turn and threats that made my hands shake. And now he was lying on his back in the philosophy section, eyes wide open, staring up at a first edition of Plato as if he finally had a question he couldn't answer. There was a letter opener in his chest. It was a beautiful object, Victorian silver, the handle shaped like a quill feather. It belonged on the desk. It was currently buried to the hilt in the silk tie that cost more than my monthly rent. I stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Thorne was dead. There was no question of checking a pulse. The stillness of him was absolute, a heavy, object-like quality that living things simply do not possess. But it wasn't the body that made my blood run cold. It was the book. Someone had placed a book on his chest, right over his heart, just below the handle of the letter opener. It was open, pages spread like wings. I leaned in, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just any book. It was a copy of Bleak House. And it was open to chapter 1. In Chancery. The chapter about a legal case that drags on for generations, destroying everyone who touches it. A message. Someone hadn't just killed Julian Thorne. They had curated his death. They had arranged him like a display in the window. And the only person who knew the inventory well enough to find that specific copy in the dark, was me. The police arrived 10 minutes after I called them, bringing with them the chaos of radios and wet raincoats and the sharp, intrusive beam of flashlights that had no respect for the dignity of old books. The lead detective was a man named Inspector Hale. He was not a cozy man. He did not look like a man who drank tea or solved puzzles for fun. He looked like a man who had seen the worst of the world and decided he didn't like it very much. He was broad-shouldered, his raincoat dripping water onto my floorboards, his face set in lines of permanent exhaustion. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked, "Did you touch the book?" I stood by the spiral stairs, hugging my cardigan around myself. No. I touched nothing. Hale crouched beside the body, his knees cracking audibly. He peered at the silver handle of the letter opener. He looked at the open pages of Dickens. "Symbolic," he muttered. He looked up at me, his eyes gray and sharp as flint. "You're the book expert, Miss Vance. What does it mean?" "It's Bleak House," I said, my voice sounding thin in the high-ceilinged room. "It's about a lawsuit. Jarndyce and Jarndyce. A case that never ends. It eats up money and lives until there's nothing left." Hale stood up slowly. "And Mr. Thorne here? Was he involved in a lawsuit?" "He was threatening one," I said. "He wanted to condemn this building. He claimed the foundation was unsound. He was going to drag Mr. Abernathy through the courts to force a sale." "So you had a reason to hate him?" "It wasn't a question. Half the town had a reason to hate him," I replied, finding a thread of steel in my voice. "He was evicting the bakery down the street. He bought the old cinema and turned it into luxury flats that no one here can afford. He was a predator." "Predators make enemies," Hale said. "But usually, their enemies don't leave literary criticism on the corpse." He walked over to the desk. He looked at the lamp. He looked at the safe in the corner, which was still open. "Was this open when you came down?" "Yes. That's why I came down. I remembered I hadn't locked it." "Is anything missing?" I walked to the safe. I didn't need to look inside to know. I knew the empty space in the darkness like I knew the shape of my own teeth. "The ledger," I whispered. Hale stepped closer. "What ledger?" "Mr. Abernathy's private sales records. From the 1940s. It wasn't valuable. Not to a collector. It was just lists. Names of people who bought books during the war." Hale frowned. "Why would a killer steal a list of names from 80 years ago?" "I don't know. Unless," Hale said, turning back to the body, "Thorne wasn't here for the building. Maybe he was here for the book." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the dust from the tops of the shelves. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then surged back on. Hale watched me. "You're the only one with a key, Miss Vance. The only one besides Mr. Abernathy, and he hasn't left the nursing home in 2 years. So, whoever got in either broke in, or you let them in. There's no sign of forced entry," a uniformed officer called from the front door. "Lock is intact. Deadbolt was thrown open from the inside." Hale's gaze settled on me. It was heavy. It felt like an indictment. "From the inside," Hale repeated. "I didn't kill him," I said. "No. Then you have a ghost, Miss Vance. Because this shop was locked tight, and yet a man is dead on your floor with your letter opener in his chest. They took my statement. They took my fingerprints. They photographed the shop until I felt like the books themselves were being violated. When they finally left, taking the body of Julian Thorne with them in a black bag that looked irreconcilably modern against the Victorian woodwork, the shop felt colder than it ever had. They had taped off the philosophy section. Yellow crime scene tape draped over the bust of Aristotle. It looked garish. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't go back upstairs to my flat, knowing that directly beneath my bed, a man had died. I went to the kitchen at the back of the shop and made tea. Strong tea. The kind you drink when you need to shock your system back into operation. I sat at the small wooden table and thought about the ledger. Why steal a ledger? Julian Thorne dealt in real estate, not rare books. He didn't care about provenance. He cared about square footage. If he had broken in or been let in, why go for a book of old sales receipts? Unless the ledger proved something about the building. Or about the people who owned it. I set my cup down. There was something the police had missed. I stood up and walked back into the main shop, ducking under the police tape. I knew I shouldn't be there. But this was my shop. These were my books. I went to the spot where Thorne had fallen. The chalk outline was faint on the dark wood. I looked at the shelf he had been standing in front of. Philosophy. Plato. Aristotle. Kant. But there was a gap. A small gap, perhaps 2 inches wide, on the third shelf up. I knew my inventory. I knew it by touch. The missing book wasn't Bleak House. That had been pulled from the fiction section, 3 aisles away. The book missing from this shelf was different. It was a small, green cloth-bound volume. The Ethics of Ambiguity. But behind where that book should have been, deep in the shadows of the shelf, something white caught my eye. I reached in. It was a piece of paper, folded into a tight square. It had been shoved behind the books, pushed back against the wood of the shelf backing. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a receipt. Not an old one. A new one. Dated yesterday. From Blackwood Restoration Services. For Chemical Analysis of Structural Timber, the Crow's Nest. I stared at the paper. Thorne had commissioned a structural analysis. Why? He didn't own the building yet. I looked at the bottom of the receipt. There was a handwritten note in red ink. Found it. It's in the walls. The old man knew. My hand trembled. The old man knew. Mr. Abernathy. What was in the walls? I looked around the shop. The walls were lined with books. Behind the books was plaster and lathe. Behind that, stone. Thorne hadn't come here tonight to threaten me. He had come here to look for something he believed was hidden in the structure of the shop itself. And someone had caught him doing it. Someone who hated him enough to stage a scene from Dickens. I pocketed the receipt. I should have called Hale. I should have handed it over. But Hale had looked at me like I was the killer. If I handed him this, would he see it as a clue, or would he see it as me trying to deflect blame? If you enjoyed the way the mystery unfolded in this chapter, please like this video. It helps us keep the shop open for more stories. I needed to know what was in the walls before I told the police. I needed to talk to the only person who might understand what the old man knew. I needed to visit Mr. Abernathy. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the town of Oakhaven scrubbed clean and raw. The sky was a bruised purple, the pavement slick with wet leaves. I walked up the hill to the Willows nursing home. It was a pleasant place that smelled of lavender and antiseptic, the smell of people waiting to leave. Mr. Abernathy was in the sunroom, wrapped in a tartan blanket, staring out at the sea. He looked like a bird made of paper, fragile and translucent. Mr. Abernathy? I said softly, sitting beside him. He turned his head. His eyes were milky blue, swimming with cataracts and confusion. Elara, he said. His voice was like dry leaves skittering on pavement. You're late. The shop needs opening. The shop is closed today, Arthur. There was an accident. Accident? He frowned. Did you spill the ink? I told you, that inkwell is treacherous. No. Arthur, listen to me. Julian Thorne is dead. The name didn't seem to register. He picked at the wool of his blanket. Arthur, someone killed him in the shop. And the ledger is gone. The 1940s sales ledger. His hands stopped moving. Slowly, very slowly, he turned to look at me. The confusion in his eyes cleared, just for a second, replaced by a sharp, terrified lucidity. The ledger, he whispered. Yes. Who would want it? They're coming back, he said. His voice rose in pitch. I told him they would come back. He said it was safe. He said the war was over. Who said it was safe? The architect, Arthur hissed. He leaned forward, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Don't let them open the wall, Elara. Don't let them find the silver. The silver? The traitor's silver, he shouted. A nurse turned from across the room, frowning. Arthur, hush, I whispered. What traitor? What are you talking about? Thorn. Arthur's eyes darted around the room. Thorn isn't a developer. He's a hunter. He hunts the legacy. He's dead, Arthur. Then another will come. He was shaking now. Check the spine, Elara. Check the spine of the Atlas. The big one. In the map room. The Atlas? The key, he gasped. The key is in the Atlas. Mr. Abernathy, you're upsetting yourself, the nurse said, bustling over. I think that's enough for today, Miss Vance. Wait, I said. Arthur, what key? But the fog had returned. He slumped back into his chair, his eyes drifting back to the sea. The tide is coming in, he murmured. It washes everything clean. I was ushered out, my heart hammering against my ribs. The traitor's silver. The architect. A key in an atlas. It sounded like the ramblings of a senile mind. But Julian Thorne had been looking for something in the walls. And the ledger was gone. I walked back down the hill, my mind racing. If Thorne was a hunter, who was he hunting for? And if the key was in the atlas? I had to get to it before the police finished their search. I returned to the shop. The police tape was still across the door, but the officer stationed there was young, bored, and checking his phone. I need to get some clothes, I lied. I can't stay in the flat without my things. He shrugged. 5 minutes. Don't touch the crime scene. I slipped inside. The silence was heavier now. The chalk outline seemed to vibrate on the floor. I went straight to the map room, a small alcove in the back where we kept the oversized folios. The Atlas of the World, 1895 edition. It was enormous, a book that required 2 hands to lift. It sat on a special lectern. I opened it. The spine cracked loudly. I ran my fingers down the inner binding. There. A lump. A hard lump beneath the canvas lining of the spine. I didn't have a knife. I used my fingernail to pick at the old glue. The fabric tore. Something slid out into my hand. It wasn't a key. It was a small, flat piece of metal. Copper. Shaped like a puzzle piece. It had jagged edges on 3 sides, as if it were meant to interlock with other pieces. And etched into the copper was a symbol. An eye. An open eye with a line through it. I stared at it. What did you find? The voice came from the shadows. I spun around, hiding the copper piece behind my back. Standing in the doorway of the map room was a woman. She was tall, elegant, wearing a raincoat that looked like it cost a fortune. Her hair was severe, cut into a sharp bob. She looked like a razor blade dressed as a person. It was Veronica Thorne. Julian's wife. Or rather, his widow. Mrs. Thorne, I said. How did you get in? The officer let me in, she said. Her voice was smoke and glass. I came to see where my husband died. She stepped into the alcove. The space was too small for 2 people. You found something, she said. I saw you put it behind your back. I found dust, I said. This is a bookshop. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were searching the room, hungry. Julian was a fool, she said. He thought he could bully you. He thought he could bully the old man. He was trying. He was looking for the wrong thing, she said. He thought it was gold. Or cash. He didn't understand the history. What history? She stepped closer. The history of the Blackwood smugglers. This shop wasn't always a shop, Miss Vance. 200 years ago, it was a distribution point. For things that weren't meant to be taxed. Smugglers. The Blackwood gang. They didn't just smuggle brandy. They smuggled information. Spies. During the Napoleonic Wars. And later. She looked at the atlas. They left things behind. Julian was obsessed with finding their hoard. And you? I asked. Are you obsessed too? I'm practical, she said. Julian leveraged everything we owned to buy this block. If he didn't find that hoard, we were bankrupt. Now he's dead. And I am left with his debts. She held out a gloved hand. Give me what you found. I don't have anything. She sighed. Elara. May I call you Elara? You seem like a smart girl. You don't want to be involved in this. This is a game for people who can afford to lose. You can't. Is that a threat? It's financial advice. Suddenly, the front door bell chimed. The police officer shouted, "Hey! You can't go in there." Heavy footsteps pounded on the floorboards. Inspector Hale appeared in the doorway of the map room. He looked at Veronica. He looked at me. He looked at my hand behind my back. Mrs. Thorne, Hale said, his voice flat. This is a crime scene. Please wait outside. Veronica didn't flinch. She lowered her hand. I was just introducing myself to the landlord. Landlord? I asked. Oh, didn't you know? Veronica smiled, a sharp, terrible expression. Julian bought the deed yesterday morning. Before he died. I own this building now, Elara. And I'm afraid your lease is up. She swept past Hale and walked out. I stood frozen. She owned the shop. She could evict me. She could tear the walls down. She could find whatever was hidden. Hale looked at me. What do you have in your hand? I hesitated. If I gave it to him, it went into evidence. Veronica would never see it. But neither would I. And I wouldn't know what it opened. But if I kept it, I was obstructing justice. I brought my hand out. I found this, I said. In the atlas. Hale took the copper puzzle piece. He examined the eye symbol. Curious, he muttered. Mrs. Thorne said her husband bought the building yesterday, I said. We're checking the records, Hale said. If he did, that gives a lot of people a motive. Including you. Me. If he bought it, he could evict you. Maybe you got angry. Maybe you snapped. I didn't kill him. Then why did you hide this piece of metal when his widow walked in? Because I didn't trust her. Hale pocketed the evidence. Stay in town, Miss Vance. Don't try to leave. He turned to go. Inspector, I called out. He stopped. The letter opener, I said. The one in his chest. What about it? It wasn't mine. Hale frowned. You said it was the one from the desk. I thought it was. But I looked at it closer when I was down here last night. You came down here last night? Yes. And I saw the handle. My letter opener has a pattern of ivy leaves on the quill. The one in his chest, it had feathers. Detailed feathers. Hale stared at me. Are you sure? I'm an archivist. I notice details. That wasn't my opener. The killer brought their own weapon. Hale's expression shifted. For the first time, he didn't look at me with suspicion. He looked at me with calculation. "If that's true," he said, "then this was premeditated. Highly premeditated." He walked away. I was alone again. But I had kept something back. When I had torn the fabric of the atlas spine, I hadn't just found the copper piece. I had found a slip of paper. I had palmed it before I took the metal out. It was currently tucked into my sleeve. I waited until the police car drove away with Veronica. Then I pulled the paper out. It was a map. A hand-drawn map of the shop. But the lines didn't match the shelves. It showed a staircase that didn't exist. A staircase leading down. Beneath the main floor. The note on the map said, "The Crypt. Entry via the poets." The poets. The poetry section. I walked to the poetry aisle. Keats. Shelley. Byron. I looked at the floorboards. They looked solid. I looked at the shelves. Entry via the poets. I began to pull books off the shelf. Nothing behind them but wood. I sat on the floor, frustrated. Then I looked at the bust of Dante on the top shelf. It was facing the wall. Dante faced the wall. I never put him that way. I climbed the rolling ladder. I reached up and turned the heavy plaster head of Dante to face the room. There was a click. A heavy, mechanical clunk from the floor. The entire bookcase, the section holding the Romantics, swung forward an inch. A secret door. The crypt. I pushed the bookcase. It swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges. Behind it was a stone staircase leading down into darkness. The smell of damp earth and sea salt wafted up. This wasn't a basement. This was a smuggler's tunnel. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I descended. The tunnel was narrow. It went deep. At the bottom, it opened into a small, circular chamber. The walls were lined with metal boxes. Safety deposit boxes. But they were old. Rusted. In the center of the room was a table. On the table was a lantern, unlit, and a stack of books. I walked to the table. The books were ledgers. But not sales ledgers. They were logs. 1942, shipment received. 4 crates. Gold bullion. 1943, shipment sent. 2 paintings. Verify authentication. The Blackwood Gang. They weren't just smugglers. They were fencing stolen art during the war. And the last entry. 1945, the silver. Sealed in box 44. Key separated. Box 44. I looked at the wall of boxes. Number 44 was right at eye level. It had a strange keyhole. Jagged. 3-sided. The copper puzzle piece. The piece I had given to Hale. I groaned. I had given away the key. But then I looked closer at the box. It wasn't locked. It had been forced open. Recently. The metal around the lock was bent, scratches shining bright silver against the rust. The box was empty. Someone had beaten me to it. Was it Julian? If Julian had found this, why was he still looking in the shop? Why was he killed? Unless he didn't find it. Unless the killer found it. I heard a noise. Not from the stairs behind me. From the tunnel ahead. The chamber wasn't the end. There was another tunnel leading out, toward the sea. Footsteps. Slapping on wet stone. Someone was coming from the harbor side. I doused my light. I stood in the darkness, the smell of the sea overwhelming now. The footsteps got closer. A beam of light cut through the dark, sweeping across the stone walls. "I know you're down here," a voice echoed. It wasn't Hale. It wasn't Veronica. It was a man's voice. Rough. Familiar. You shouldn't have opened the door, Elara. My breath hitched. I knew that voice. It was Mr. Abernathy's son. David. The son who had been disowned 20 years ago. The son who was supposed to be in Australia. He stepped into the chamber, holding a heavy flashlight and a crowbar. David? I whispered. He swung the light onto my face. I squinted, blinded. Hello, Elara, he said. He looked older, ragged. His eyes were wild. Where is it? Where is what? The ledger. The list. My father said you had the list. The sales ledger? No. The list of the buyers. The people who bought the stolen silver. That list is worth millions in blackmail alone. I don't have it. Liar. He stepped closer, raising the crowbar. Thorne was looking for it too. He got greedy. He tried to cut me out. My heart hammered. You killed Thorne. He found the entrance, David spat. He saw me coming out. He knew. I couldn't let him take it. It's my inheritance. So you stabbed him. And put a book on his chest. David laughed. A jagged sound. The book? I didn't put a book on him. I stabbed him and ran. I didn't have time for reading. I froze. If David killed Thorne and ran. Then who put the book there? Who arranged the body? Who turned off the lamp? David wasn't the only one in the shop that night. There was someone else. Someone who came in after the murder. Someone who curated the scene. David, I said slowly. You need to listen to me. Someone else was here. Shut up. He lunged. I scrambled back, tripping over the table. The ledgers scattered. David raised the crowbar high. Then a click. Loud. Echoing. From the tunnel behind David. David froze. He turned. A silhouette stood in the archway of the tunnel leading to the sea. A figure in a long raincoat, holding a gun. Drop the bar, David, a voice said. It was a woman's voice. Calm. Cultured. Veronica Thorne. She stepped into the light. She wasn't holding a purse now. She was holding a pistol. You, David snarled. Me, she said. I knew Julian was meeting someone here. I followed him. I saw you leave. You watched? I gasped. You watched him die. Veronica looked at me, her face pale and hard like marble. I watched him fall, she said. And then I went inside. I checked his pockets. I checked the safe. I needed to know if he found the silver before I called the police. You staged the body. I whispered. I needed time, she said. I needed the police to look for a psychopath, a serial killer. Someone obsessed with books. Not a desperate son or a grieving widow. I bought myself a day of confusion. She looked at David. But you, she said. You are a loose end. She raised the gun. No. I shouted. I threw the heavy ledger at Veronica. It was a pathetic weapon, but it startled her. The gun wavered. David didn't hesitate. He swung the crowbar, not at Veronica, but at the support pillar of the tunnel. The wood cracked. Dust rained down. If I go, we all go. David screamed. He swung again. The ceiling groaned. This tunnel was 200 years old. It wasn't built for structural violence. Stop! Veronica shouted. The chamber shook. A stone fell from the ceiling, shattering on the table. I rolled under the table as the roof began to give way. The sound of the earth breaking is not a crash. It is a scream. It started low, a grinding groan of stone against stone, the sound of a heavy door forcing itself shut against its will. Then the timber support, the one David had smashed with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, splintered. It sounded like a gunshot, sharp and final. I rolled under the heavy oak table just as the ceiling surrendered. Dust, heavy and thick as wool, slammed into the floor. It wasn't just dirt, it was the pulverized remains of 200 years of silence. It tasted of salt and rot. A rock the size of a typewriter smashed onto the table above me, cracking the wood. The legs buckled but held. "David!" I screamed, though the sound was swallowed instantly by the roar of falling masonry. I couldn't see him. I couldn't see Veronica. The beam of my phone's flashlight cut through the dust like a lighthouse in a fog, illuminating nothing but swirling gray particles. Then, silence. A silence so profound it felt like pressure in my ears. "Hello?" I coughed, the dust coating my tongue. A groan from the darkness. Not David. It was higher, tighter. "You idiot," a voice hissed. "You absolute idiot. Veronica." She was alive. I crawled out from under the table. The air was thick, choking. I swept my light around. The entrance we had come through, the tunnel leading back to the bookshop, was gone. A wall of rubble, jagged stones and snapped timbers, blocked the way. We were cut off from the shop. Cut off from the world above. David Abernathy lay half buried near the blockage. I scrambled over to him, my knees scraping against loose gravel. He was pinned from the waist down by a slab of slate. His face was gray, his eyes wide and staring up at the darkness. "David?" I touched his shoulder. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. The crowbar was still clutched in his hand, but the hand was limp. He was gone. The son who had come home for his inheritance had found it in the weight of the house itself. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Panic used up oxygen, and I didn't know how much we had left. "Is he dead?" Veronica asked. She was standing near the sea-tunnel archway, dusting off her raincoat as if she had merely been caught in a drizzle. She looked shaken, her hair mussed, but unharmed. "Yes," I said, standing up. My legs shook. "He's dead." "Good," she said. "He was a liability." I stared at her. He was a human being. He was Mr. Abernathy's son. He was a murderer, she snapped. And he just trapped us in a grave. "Do you have a signal on that phone?" I checked. "No. We're too deep. And under stone." "Then we have to go out the other way," she said, gesturing to the dark tunnel behind her. "The sea exit." "The tide," I said. "Mr. Abernathy said the tide washes everything clean. If the tide is in, that tunnel will be underwater. Do you have a better idea? Shall we wait here until the air runs out?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked into the darkness of the sea tunnel. I looked back at David one last time. I couldn't help him. I couldn't move the rock. I reached down and gently pried the flashlight from his other hand. It was a heavy-duty workman's light, far stronger than my phone. I took it. I took the ledger that had fallen on the floor, the one labeled 1945. And I followed the widow into the dark. The sea tunnel was narrower than the one from the shop. The floor was slick with slime and algae. It smelled intensely of the ocean, cold, briny, and vast. We walked for 10 minutes. The air grew colder. The sound of water grew louder. Not the gentle lapping of a harbor, but the booming, echoing crash of waves hitting a confined space. "It's loud," Veronica shouted over the noise. "We're getting close to the exit." We rounded a bend, and the beam of my flashlight hit water. Black, churning water. The tunnel sloped downward into a pool that filled the passage from wall to wall. The roof of the tunnel dipped low ahead. "It's flooded," Veronica said, her voice rising in pitch. "We're trapped." I moved to the water's edge. I shined the light into the murky depths. I could see the arch of the exit about 20 feet ahead, underwater. But above the water line, there was a gap. A small, crescent-shaped gap of air between the water and the stone ceiling. Maybe 6 inches. "The tide is high," I said. "But it's not full. There's an air pocket." "You expect me to swim through that?" Veronica looked at her expensive coat, then at the black water. "I can't swim." "Then you'll drown," I said. "The tide is still coming in. In an hour, that air pocket will be gone." I didn't wait for her to argue. I took off my cardigan and wrapped the ledger inside it, tying the sleeves tight. I hoped it would offer some protection. I strapped my bag across my chest. "Stay close to the ceiling," I told her. "Keep your nose up. Pull yourself along the rocks." I waded in. The cold was a physical blow, punching the breath out of me. It was freezing, the kind of cold that makes your muscles seize. I pushed forward. The water rose to my chest, then my neck. I tilted my head back, pressing my face against the slimy stone of the ceiling, gasping for the thin layer of damp air. Behind me, I heard Veronica splashing, gasping, cursing. "Keep moving," I shouted, though it came out as a gargle. I pulled myself along the wall. The current was strong here, pushing in, pushing us back. I had to fight it, digging my fingers into cracks in the rock. 10 feet. 15 feet. My light caught a glimmer of gray ahead. Not rock. Sky. Moonlight. The exit. I lunged for it. The ceiling ended. The water opened up. I burst out into the night air, gasping, coughing up salt water. I was in a cove. A small, rocky inlet at the base of the cliffs below the town. The waves were crashing against the rocks, spraying foam high into the air. The storm clouds were breaking, revealing a jagged, indifferent moon. I scrambled up the rocks, slipping on seaweed, dragging myself out of the surf. I turned back. Veronica broke the surface a moment later, thrashing, panic in her eyes. The current caught her, slamming her against a rock. I reached out. I grabbed her wrist. Her grip was like iron, frantic. I hauled her up onto the shelf of rock. She collapsed, coughing, retching, her elegant coat ruined, her hair plastered to her skull. We lay there for a long time, 2 women who hated each other, shivering on a rock at the edge of the world. "You saved me," she wheezed finally. "I didn't want to explain 2 bodies to the police," I said. "One is hard enough." We had to climb the cliff path to get back to the town. It was a goat track, steep and treacherous, but it was better than the freezing water. When we reached the top, we were near the old lighthouse, a mile from the shop. The town of Oakhaven lay spread out below us, sleeping. Only the blue flashing lights near the crow's nest showed that the nightmare was still awake. "I'm going to the police," I said. "I'm going to tell them David killed your husband." Veronica stood up, wringing water from her sleeves. She had regained some of her composure, though she looked like a drowned rat. "And are you going to tell them I was there?" she asked. "Yes. You held a gun on us." "It wasn't a real gun," she said quickly. "It was a starter pistol. For yacht races. Julian kept it in the car. It looked real enough. Listen to me, Elara." She stepped closer, her teeth chattering. "We have a neat ending. David killed Julian for the inheritance. David died in the collapse. It's tragic. It's simple. The police love simple." "And what about the book?" I asked. "The copy of Bleak House? David didn't put that there. You did. I told you why. To buy time. Or, I said, to point the finger at me." You knew I was the bookseller. You knew arranging the body like a scene from a book would make the police look at me. She stared at me, cold and unblinking. I didn't care who they looked at, she said. As long as it wasn't me. And as long as they didn't find the silver before I did. The silver wasn't there, Veronica. The box was empty. I know, she hissed. Someone else got there first. Who? I don't know. But whoever it is, they're dangerous. More dangerous than David. She turned and began walking toward the road. Where are you going? To my hotel. To a hot bath. And then to my lawyer. She paused. Don't mention the gun, Elara. If you do, I'll tell them you led David into that tunnel. I'll tell them you knew the roof was unstable. I'll make it look like you engineered his death. That's a lie. It's a story, she said. And I have more money to tell my version than you do. She walked away into the darkness. I watched her go. I touched the sodden bundle of my cardigan. The ledger was still inside. The police station was warm. That was the best thing I could say about it. Inspector Hale looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He sat across from me in the interview room, a plastic cup of coffee in his hand. I was wrapped in a foil emergency blanket, shivering despite the heat. Let me get this straight, Hale said, rubbing his eyes. You found a secret tunnel behind the poets. Yes. You went down there. You found David Abernathy. Yes. He confessed to killing Julian Thorne with a letter opener because of a dispute over a smuggler's hoard. Yes. And then the tunnel collapsed, killing him, and you swam out into the ocean. Yes. Hale stared at me. Miss Vance, this is Oakhaven. Not an adventure novel. Send a team to the cove, I said. You'll see the exit. And send a structural engineer to the shop. You'll find the collapse under the floor. We're doing that now. But there's a problem. What problem? Veronica Thorne. She came in an hour ago. What did she say? She confirms David killed her husband. She says she followed him there, saw him enter the shop, and saw him leave with blood on his hands. But she says you weren't there. My blood ran cold. What? She says she saw David go in alone. She says she never entered the tunnel. She claims she was watching from her car the whole time. She was cutting herself out of the scene. She was erasing the gun, the tunnel, the confrontation. She was there. I insisted. She swam out with me. She's dry, Miss Vance. And her clothes are at her hotel, perfectly pressed. She must have changed. Disposed of the wet clothes. She's lying, I said. She staged the body. She put the book on his chest. Hale leaned forward. She says you did that. She says David told her, before he ran, that the little librarian was acting strange. That you were obsessed with Thorne. That's insane. Is it? You're the one with the motive. The eviction. David confessed. David is dead. He can't sign a statement. Hale sighed. Look, Elara. I believe David killed him. The forensics on the crowbar found in his car which we located an hour ago matched the bruises on Thorne's arms. Defensive wounds. But the stabbing? And the staging? He looked at me with something almost like pity. We found the letter opener. The one in the chest. It wasn't mine, I said. I told you. We traced it, Hale said. It belonged to Mr. Abernathy. It was part of a desk set he kept in his office. Arthur. And his prints are on it. Arthur is in a nursing home. He can't walk without a walker. I know. Which means someone took it from him. Or, someone who had access to his things used it. Me. I didn't kill him, I said again, my voice trembling. "You're free to go for now," Hale said. "But don't leave town. And stay away from Mrs. Thorne. She's filed a harassment complaint against you." I walked out of the station into the dawn. The town was waking up. Delivery trucks were rumbling. The bakery was opening. I had no shop. I had no home. It was a crime scene. I had no clothes except the damp ones I was wearing. But I had the ledger. I went to the only place I could think of. The 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town. It was empty. It was warm. I put my clothes in a dryer and sat in my underwear wrapped in my coat in the corner. I pulled out the ledger I had saved from the cave. It was damp, the ink blurred in places. But it was legible. 1945, the silver. Sealed in box 44. I turned the page. There was a list. A list of names. Buyer 1, V.T. Buyer 2, H.G. Buyer 3, R.B. Initials. Not names. But at the bottom of the page, there was a note in different handwriting. Sharp, angular script. The architect demands payment. The silver is not enough. He wants the deed. The architect. Mr. Abernathy had screamed about the architect in the nursing home. He said it was safe. The architect. I needed to find out who the architect was. I took out my phone. The screen was cracked, but it worked. I searched the local historical records for Oakhaven architects in the 1940s. There were 3. One built the church. One built the school. The third one. Silas Thorne. My breath hitched. Thorne. Julian Thorne's grandfather. I searched for Silas Thorne. He wasn't an architect of buildings. He was a naval architect. He designed bunkers, fortifications, and smuggling tunnels. If Silas Thorne was the architect, then Julian Thorne wasn't just a developer looking for a quick buck. He was looking for his family's legacy. But Veronica, she had said Julian didn't understand the history. Julian was a fool. He thought it was gold. Veronica knew more than she was letting on. And if Silas Thorne was the architect, and he wanted the deed. I looked at the ledger again. 1946, deed transferred to S. Thorne. Nullified by fire. The fire. The town hall fire of 1946. It destroyed half the records in Oakhaven. That's why Julian wanted to buy the shop. He didn't have proof of ownership. He was trying to buy what his grandfather had stolen but couldn't prove he owned. But what about the silver? Box 44. It had been empty. Forced open. By whom? Not Julian. He was dead. Not David. He was looking for it. Not Veronica. She was asking me for it. There was a third player. Someone who had access to the tunnels. Someone who knew the history. Someone who had a key or knew how to pick a lock. I thought about the letter opener. The feathers. I thought about the book. Bleak House. In Chancery. A legal case that drags on forever. Who would benefit from a legal case dragging on? Or who would benefit from it ending? I needed to go back to the beginning. I needed to go back to the books. I waited until my clothes were dry. I dressed. I felt gritty, exhausted, but my mind was sharpening. It was the feeling I got when I was restoring a book, the focus narrowing down to a single thread. I went to the library. Not my shop, the public library. I needed to look up the obituary of Silas Thorne. I found it on microfiche. Died 1955. Survived by his son, Marcus. Marcus Thorne. Julian's father. I looked up Marcus. Died 1990. And then I looked up Julian's marriage announcement. Julian Thorne weds Veronica Black. Black. Blackwood? Was Veronica a descendant of the Blackwood smugglers? Was that why she was so interested? Was this a feud between two criminal families, the Thornes and the Blackwoods, spanning 3 generations? The Blackwood gang. They didn't just smuggle brandy. Veronica had said that. If Veronica was a Blackwood, she believed the shop belonged to her by blood. Julian believed it belonged to him by deed. They were married enemies. And David Abernathy was just the poor fool caught in the middle, sitting on a property he didn't understand. But who killed Julian? David confessed. But David was dead. It was too neat. David swung the crowbar. Wait. In the tunnel. David had said, I stabbed him and ran. I didn't have time for reading. David admitted to the stabbing. But the letter opener wasn't David's. It was Mr. Abernathy's. How did David get Mr. Abernathy's letter opener? David hadn't been in the nursing home. He was estranged. Who visited Mr. Abernathy? Me. And I closed my eyes, thinking back to the visitor log at the nursing home. I signed it every week. There was another name I often saw on the page above mine. Peter Hale. Inspector Hale. No. Hale was the detective. I pulled up the police directory on the library computer. Inspector Robert Hale. So who was Peter Hale? I searched the name. Peter Hale. Antiquarian. Rare book specialist. A competitor. A man who had a shop in the next town over. A man who had offered to buy the Crow's Nest stock 3 years ago, but Mr. Abernathy refused. Why was a rare book dealer visiting a senile old man? To get the location of the silver. I stood up. Peter Hale. Robert Hale. Brothers? I searched. Robert Hale and Peter Hale attended the funeral of their mother. Brothers. The detective investigating the murder was the brother of the man trying to buy the books. And the detective had been very quick to dismiss the letter opener. Very quick to point the finger at David. We found the letter opener. It belonged to Mr. Abernathy. Hale knew that because his brother Peter had probably stolen it. Maybe Peter Hale stole the opener to frame me. Or to frame David. Or maybe Peter Hale was the one in the shop. Maybe Peter Hale found the box empty too. I had to find Peter Hale. His shop was called The Gilded Page. It was in Brighton, an hour away by train. But I didn't have time for a train. I walked out of the library. The sun was fully up now, harsh and revealing. I needed to get back into the Crow's Nest. Not to the tunnel. To the office. If Peter Hale had been visiting Arthur, Arthur might have written it down. Arthur wrote everything down before his memory failed. I went to the back alley behind my shop. The police tape was there, but no officer. They were busy at the cove, recovering David's body. I climbed the fire escape to my flat. I had a spare key hidden under a loose brick in the wall, a habit from when I lost my keys as a teenager. I got in. The flat was cold. I went down the spiral stairs, heart in my throat. The shop was silent. The chalk outline was still there. I went to the desk. The police had taken the computer, the current ledgers. But they hadn't taken the Rolodex. It was too old-fashioned. I flipped through it. Hale, Peter. There was a card. And on the back of the card, in Arthur's shaky handwriting. Asterisk, don't trust him. He smells of smoke. He wants the list, asterisk. He smells of smoke. When I found the body, I smelled copper. And ozone. And vanilla. But I also smelled. I closed my eyes, forcing the memory. Tobacco? No. Not cigarette smoke. Wood smoke. Like a fire that had burned out. The same smell that was on Veronica's coat when she came out of the tunnel. But also, I looked at the bookshelves. The gap in the philosophy section. I walked over to it. The book missing was The Ethics of Ambiguity. I reached in and felt the back of the shelf again. There was a hole. A tiny peephole drilled through the wood. I put my eye to it. I could see into the office. Straight at the safe. Someone had drilled a hole to watch the combination. Who had access to the shelves long enough to drill a hole? A customer? No. It would be too loud. A repairman? Blackwood Restoration Services. The receipt I found. Chemical analysis of structural timber. Julian Thorne hired them. If Julian hired a restoration company, they had access. They had drills. I looked at the receipt again. It was still in my pocket, damp but readable. Signed, V. Black. Veronica Black. Veronica Thorne. She owned the restoration company. She drilled the hole. She watched me open the safe. She got the combination. She stole the 1940s sales ledger before the murder. But she didn't find the silver. That was in the tunnel. So she came back. This was a circular firing squad. Julian, Veronica, David, Peter Hale. Everyone circling the same pot of gold. But who killed Julian? David said he did. But the letter opener. I heard a floorboard creak. I wasn't alone. I ducked down behind the philosophy aisle. Through the gap in the books, I saw shoes. Heavy, black boots. Police boots. Inspector Hale. He was walking through the shop. He wasn't looking at the crime scene. He was looking at the books. He walked to the fiction section. He pulled out a book. He shook it. He put it back. He pulled another. He was searching. Looking for something, Inspector. I said, standing up. Hale jumped. His hand went to his belt, but he didn't draw a weapon. He looked guilty. Miss Vance. You're trespassing. It's my shop. Or it was. It's a crime scene. Why are you shaking the books, Inspector? Hale stared at me. His face was gray. I'm looking for evidence. You're looking for what your brother couldn't find, I said. Hale froze. Peter, I said. He visits Mr. Abernathy. He stole the letter opener. Did he give it to you? Or did he give it to David? Hale took a step toward me. The exhaustion fell away from his face, replaced by a cold, hard menace. You're a very smart girl, Elara. Too smart. Where is Peter? Peter is unavailable. Did you kill him too? No, Hale said. David killed Julian. That's the truth. David was a loose cannon. But Peter. Peter was just greedy. He hired David to scare Julian. To rough him up. Get him to back off the property. And David went too far. David was high on something. He snapped. He stabbed Julian. Peter panicked. He called me. So you staged the scene, I whispered. To protect your brother. You put the book on the chest. Bleak House. Why? To confuse things. To make it look like a puzzle. To buy time for Peter to get out of the country. And the letter opener? Peter brought it. To threaten Julian. He dropped it when David attacked. David picked it up. It made sense. It fit the physical evidence. But you're still looking, I said. Why are you shaking the books? Hale looked at the shelves. Because Peter said Arthur hid something else. Not the silver. The silver is gone. It was melted down 40 years ago. Melted? The Blackwood gang melted it down to buy immunity. The silver in the box was a decoy. Then what are they all looking for? The blackmail, Hale said. The list of names. The people who bought the stolen art. The collaborators. That list destroys half the wealthy families in this county. Including the Thorns. Including my family. Your family. Our grandfather bought a painting. Of Vermeer. Stolen by the Nazis, fenced by the Blackwoods. If that gets out, my career is over. Peter's business is over. So you want the ledger? I want to burn it. I don't have it, I said. I think you do. Or you know where it is. He unbuttoned his holster. Tell me. I backed away. I bumped into the rolling ladder. I told you, the safe was empty. Arthur said the key was in the atlas. But the list. Arthur said the list was in the heart of the shop. The heart. I looked at the center of the shop. The main desk. No. The heart. The thing that keeps the shop alive. The boiler? No. I looked at the spiral staircase. It wound up through the center of the ceiling. It looked like a corkscrew. A heart valve. And at the top of the stairs, the chandelier. It was a massive, iron chandelier. It hung right over the main desk. The light, I whispered. Hale followed my gaze. It's up there. Arthur always said. Keep the light burning, Elara. Hale began to climb the spiral stairs. I waited until he was halfway up. Then I grabbed the rolling ladder. I shoved it with all my strength. It rolled along the track, gathering speed. It hit the spiral staircase with a tremendous clang. The vibration shook the iron stairs. Hale stumbled. He grabbed the railing. You little. I ran. Not to the door. He would shoot me before I got there. I ran to the secret bookcase. The poets. I slammed the bust of Dante. The bookcase swung open. I dove into the darkness just as a bullet splintered the wood of the shelf behind me. I was back in the tunnel. But the tunnel was collapsed. I was trapped. No. I wasn't trapping myself. I was trapping him. I grabbed the handle on the inside of the bookcase, a heavy iron ring. I heard Hale's boots on the floorboards. He was coming. There's nowhere to go, Elara, he shouted. The tunnel is blocked. He didn't know about the sea exit. He didn't know we had swum out. He thought I had run into a dead end. He stepped into the opening. I pulled the ring. The mechanism was counterweight. It swung shut fast. Hale saw it moving. He lunged forward to stop it. But he was too slow. The heavy bookcase slammed shut. The latch clicked. He was inside. I was outside. Wait. No. I realized with a jolt of horror what I had done. I had pulled the ring from the inside. I was inside the tunnel with him. I had locked us both in. The darkness was absolute. I heard his breathing. Heavy. Angry. Well, Hale's voice echoed in the small stone space at the top of the stairs. That was stupid. I clicked on my flashlight. He was 5 feet away. Gun leveled at my chest. Now, he said. Give me the list. I backed down the stairs. You can't shoot me, I said. The ricochet will kill you too. I'll take my chances. We descended into the collapsed chamber. The rubble pile was still there. The sea tunnel was still there. You dug out? Hale asked, looking at the water-filled archway. We swam. You swam. He laughed. And now you're going to swim again? With me shooting at the water? I don't have the list, Hale. It was destroyed in the collapse. David had it. Liar. He advanced on me. I backed up until my heels hit the water of the sea tunnel. "Give it to me." I reached into my cardigan. I pulled out the soggy lump of the ledger. "Here," I said. "Take it." I threw it at him. He caught it instinctively with his free hand. He looked down at it. In that split second of distraction, I didn't run. I kicked the water. I splashed a wave of briny, silty water directly into his face. He sputtered, blinded for a second. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling. Dust rained down. I dove into the water. I swam. Harder than I had ever swum in my life. I heard a splash behind me. He was following. I reached the air pocket. It was smaller now. The tide was higher. Maybe 3 inches of air. I gasped a breath and dove again. I pulled myself along the rock. I felt a hand grab my ankle. He had me. I kicked back, hard. My heel connected with something soft, a face. The grip loosened. I scrambled forward. I saw the moonlight. I burst out into the cove. I scrambled up the rocks. I waited. Hale didn't surface. I waited 1 minute. 2. The water churned. Bubbles rose. But no Hale. The heavy trench coat. The boots. The gun. The ledger he refused to let go of. He had weighed himself down. And the tide had done the rest. I sat on the rocks, shivering, watching the sea swallow the secret of the Blackwood gang for the last time. Epilogue. The shop reopened 3 months later. Veronica Thorne tried to claim the insurance, but the investigation into Hale and David unearthed enough fraud to tie up her assets for years. In Chancery, indeed. She moved back to London, leaving the building in limbo. The deed was never found. It likely rotted in Hale's pocket at the bottom of the bay. Which meant possession was 9/10 of the law. I stayed. I cleaned the floors. I repaired the shelves. I put the ethics of ambiguity back in its place. I never found the silver. I never found the blackmail list. I assume it dissolved with Hale. But one afternoon, while dusting the chandelier, I found something. Not a list. A letter. Tucked into the brass cup of one of the light fixtures. It was from Mr. Abernathy. Dated 10 years ago. To Elara. If you found this, you looked for the light. Good girl. There is no silver. My father spent it all trying to keep this shop open during the Depression. The blackmail list was burned by my mother in 1950. She said history shouldn't be a weapon. The treasure isn't money. It's the collection. The books. They are the memory of the world. I knew they would come for it. The greedy men. The developers. So I created a story. A legend of silver and spies. To distract them. To make them look in the walls and the floors, instead of looking at the books. You protected them, Elara. You are the keeper now. P.S. The safe combination is your birthday. I changed it years ago. I knew you'd forget to lock it eventually. I stood on the ladder, holding the letter, and I laughed. It was a quiet laugh, the kind that belongs in a bookshop. I climbed down. I made a pot of tea. The storm outside was gentle today. Just a soft rain, tapping on the glass like a friend asking to come in. I sat in the chair by the window, opened a copy of Bleak House, and began to read. The end. Subscribe and comment for more.